So I'd like to invite up onto the stage again, Georg Chmiel, who is substituting in for Ricardo because we weren't sure if Ricardo was going to make it. But so Georg has come on up. Someone, Georg, come grab a seat in the middle. And Jonathan Turpin. Jonathan is a principal at the AIM Group and spends a lot of time looking at AI. And we had some interesting conversations the other day. And I thought, why don't we do a little bit of a panel session? Now, before we kick off, okay, and 1 second, I'll let you know when to run this video. Thank you. It dropped the other day was Manus AI, and they got some good applications. One of the demo applications they have is for real estate search. Yeah. So I thought, let's show the video, right? But before we show the video, because they do it quite quickly, the guy basically puts in a prompt saying, I'm looking to purchase a property in New York in a safe neighborhood with low crime. I've got 2 kids, one in middle school, one in kindergarten. So I need access to quality schools is a priority for us. My wife and I have a combined monthly income of $50,000 US. Please help me identify suitable properties that meet these criteria and provide a comparative analysis of their listings. Now, this is just an example of what is potentially possible. Can we please run the video?
In this example, we have Manus conduct some research. It needs to filter New York properties based on multiple criteria. For complex tasks, Manus first breaks them down and creates a to-do list. Manus begins by searching and carefully reading articles about the safest neighborhoods. Then Manus researches middle schools in New York. Next, Manus writes a Python program to calculate my budget. Based on my budget, Manus filters listings on real estate websites. Finally, combining all the information gathered, Manus writes a detailed report and compiles all the resources.
Okay, so that's just a quick overview of something that is possible today. Now, clearly it's a canned presentation, so one doesn't know really what happens behind the scenes. But let's assume that that's the worst it's ever going to be, right? Because it's just going to continue to improve. And Jonathan and I were having a conversation just before, actually, and we're saying, yeah, but this is better than what was in GPT or ChatGPT. And then my thought was, but didn't that just drop like 8 weeks ago? Right? So these things are evolving at a very fast pace. So I think the way we should kick this off, and I want to break this conversation into a couple of chunks in terms of AI agents. One is around what it would mean for a consumer, someone searching for a house to rent, house to live, and so on. The second is what it means for someone looking to potentially sell a house, and does that change the process? How does that work with the real estate agency? And then the third group is what it means for agents themselves. Okay, because if you think about this whole process, and once again, Jonathan and I were talking about this the other day, you have a buyer and a seller, or a renter and a landlord, then you have everyone in between, and we're all in between, all right? So clearly, the buyer is going to still end up with the house, the seller is still going to end up with money in their bank account. Just what happens in between is going to change, and that will impact all of us. Okay, that's so. Let's start by talking about the buyer journey. And that's a good example of the buyer journey. What were your thoughts on having seen that video? And I know you've seen it before, but what are your thoughts?
So, to me, I mean, maybe just start by defining what we meant by agentic search, which, you know, is this free text search that is natural language at this stage that goes out in a kind of phase 1 as I see it, and it searches the whole internet and comes back with the right set of answers for you, presents them in an appropriate way. And I see that as a kind of phase 1. And then phase 2, much more interesting, probably, you know, 5 to 10 year time frame, is you're actually chatting to your avatar, they're presenting information to you on screen in a very interactive way, video-based content, etc. And that's kind of my vision for where it gets to. And interestingly, co-star Andy Florence recently said that they have a working version of a concept which is an avatar in real time in their Matterport 3D experience that can pull the bits of the property, talk to you about it, pull in data, etc. And I think that's where you get to, which is a totally different experience. And the near term is this kind of text-based way of evolving towards it. And my immediate thoughts on the consumer side are, I think Toby said something very relevant yesterday about NPS. The NPS on portals is very high. They do their job pretty well. No consumer is complaining about the portal. Actually, a search in real estate is a pretty simple thing. And actually the consumer is quite happy with it. So I think even when these searches come in text form, I think people are going to take a while. It's not going to be like a rapid adoption of it. Even if you've got your personal agent, it's doing all sorts of things, because people are habitual, and this thing actually works pretty well at the moment. And the classic mistake, I think, when people talk about this is they always say, well, the first example to come up is always, I want a riverside home. And yeah, I mean, an agentic search will be able to find you riverside homes. But actually, if I go into Rightmove, as I did this morning, and I put in, as soon as I get my search results for Hammersmith, Riverside, I get 438 entries, most of which are relevant to whatever. So the search actually, if you really want a riverside view, you can go find it at the moment. If you want a south-facing garden, you can go find it at the moment. And I compared it to Jitty, which is the AI search. Rightmove outperforms both if I put in keyword search on both of those kind of concepts. So I think there's a kind of, there's a consumer, there will be a slow adoption from the consumer. And I think there are some problems from the product side. So just to use a really simple one, in most portals, the exact location of the property isn't shared with the consumer, and same on agent websites. So your agentic search has got to go out and it's got to find the data. Unless it's got access to the CRMs and all of those things, it's got a real problem, because it's not going to know exactly where the property is. So ask them to put the properties on the map, whereas Rightmove has that data behind the scenes and you can put it on the map. In Spain, it's even worse. In Spain, they really don't give you location and so on. So you've got some kind of real data problems where, portals have spent a long time kind of purifying the data. And in this AI world, you've got to think, actually the other side, the bad side, is going to start playing as well. So, we've spent many years, 10, 15 years, deduping, removing fraud, getting timeliness to work. And coming to Asia reminds me, that it used to be like that in Europe, and it's evolved. You've still got much more, particularly where you've got, non-exclusive agents. All of that stuff is going to come back if the AI isn't kind of going, if it's going out and just searching generally. Yeah. The AI is going to have to figure out who to believe. Isn't it going to go to the right moves, and isn't there going to be a relationship between the
That is the interesting question that evolves. Now, yeah. Georg, you've been playing with Manus, I think.
Yes, so we are playing with Manus. I mean, when we say planning, you can register as a first user. That's as much as we're planning with it. But I mean, looking at this specific example, I would put it in a category where you make something which already exists, even if it's a bit more cumbersome to do it by yourself, slightly better. Why do I say slightly better? For the reasons outlined by Jonathan in terms of the search. I mean, finding Riverside and so on is possible already. Including the crime reports sounds nice, but we all know crime reports are a thing of the past. So from that perspective, newspapers on crime are not as relevant as maybe certain crime indices and other things which in some cases are readily available, not necessarily on the portal. What is key is with the AI agents is to work out who they are actually representing. So in this case, I do believe this example fills a gap for buyer's agents, meaning somebody wants to buy something and isn't clear what they want or what to expect, and the real estate agents will never tell them. So we had once the decision to make, do we show dengue fever maps and crime reports and so on iProperty, and we said, we don't, because it is a thing of the past that somebody was bitten by a mosquito, and number two is it doesn't really help the whole process. So it's kind of a random thing. It's wrong to draw conclusions from it. But a buyer would like to know these things. So it fills the buyer's agents a gap. The question is the buyer willing to pay for that information or not? And is the buyer willing to trust? I do believe there are other examples where Manus IM is far more helpful in this process, which is once you have kind of settled on a price, is the whole processing of things, informing certain regulatory authorities about things, getting titles from repositories, etc., etc. Because that is the part of the whole process which is annoying. Even the loan application could be much more improved for the buyer using agentic AI, because they make mistakes and so on, and it's much more efficient. You can apply to a broad variety of banks very efficiently, rather than having to go through the process or use an existing mortgage agent, broker, so to speak, in this process. That's why I do believe there is a massive change coming, because there you really improve. For the search, I would say, maybe, like to verify and ask additional questions, but I think it's probably what they're using as an example. It sounds good, but it actually is not the pain point, the biggest pain point.
So let's break this down. I take away a couple of things. One is the point around trustworthiness. Am I going to get good quality information back, or am I just getting fake listings? Okay.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, which
also
is
there's a general thing, we're going to go through a series of the first versions of this not performing as well as they should, because that's how this happens.
Yeah.
There'll be lots of stories about, oh, I tried that and it didn't work. And actually the trust will take time to rebuild from the initial kind of versions you go through.
I've got a hypothesis around this one, right? The people best positioned to roll this out are the ones least wanting to roll it out. Rightmove, for example.
Yeah.
If you think about Rightmove equals, in your average English home purchaser's mind, probably comprehensiveness. Everywhere we've got trustworthiness, what you've got is on the market, it's not fake, and so on, etc., etc. However, when you roll this out, it sort of goes around their current fundamental model, which is, I would need to present you with a list with people who pay more money, go to the top of the list, and so on. Whereas AI is about getting straight to the answer.
Yep.
Let's avoid the taking you on a long path to get there. Now, isn't that the same as the newspapers? The newspapers were the trusted source of information, but they didn't want to lose that existing model, so it allowed someone else to then emerge as the trusted source of information. Aren't we just at the beginning of that process again?
I would say probably yes, because it's kind of a spiral moving up, and it's just different technology and different things. But I mean, the essence, the essential questions are still the same when you're looking for a house and so on. I mean, there's a few new things which this can cover, which portals didn't cover. I remember 20 years ago, Domain had this great tool where you could position schools and everything and calculate lots of things. It was a bit too complex for the users. It worked, but it was too complex for the users. This is easy because it's just you ask a question and you get all the answers.
Yeah.
And I think that's what but it's kind of the same thing with more efficiently.
Yeah.
So can I challenge that a bit? Because, I think when you buy a house, it's always a compromise. There isn't the ideal house out there. You have a set of things you'd like. I mean, you'd love it to be by a river and a south-facing garden and whatever, and you end up with something different because there just aren't the houses out there. And one of the biggest factors in finding a house is fear of missing out. People want to see all the homes in an area, and they'll define an area, and I don't know what percent now have polygonal searches, etc., that are set up to do it. So you've got this fundamental fear of missing out. So people want to see the property anyway. So I think the early stages of this will always be, the things that are prioritized by the AI, but you'll still have the rest underneath, and you'll still have the ability to position stuff within that, I suspect.
Could this be a generational issue?
Yes.
Our generation has got less ADHD than the coming generation, right?
Can I jump on the generational thing? Because with social media, we have clearly shown that certain types of social media or platforms are being used by certain generations. For example, I never did Snapchat, but my kids were bigger in Snapchat, etc., etc., etc. Like I was more Facebook and so on. And the same thing will happen here. For example, if I look at my wife, she's a bit younger than me, and she uses ChatGPT to search. She doesn't Google, as an example.
Yep.
Which, by the way, I use Perplexity. I don't use Google anymore. I haven't used Google for ages.
Okay, you are obviously as young as my wife.
So we're,
I know I'm not.
so without doubt, there's a generational thing.
Yes.
But I still think when you get to buying a house,
Yeah.
you know, whatever generation you are, you're going to want to see them all, or most of them, or a large number, because that's how the house buying process, certainly in the UK, works. I'm not expert enough in Asia of whether the same things apply. So I think that gives you a much broader opportunity. And I think it also, if the vision of it giving you the perfect 3 houses is right, it's going to take a long time, as in many years and a generation, to get to the trust of that.
But it doesn't
And-
have to be
Correct.
the perfect 3 houses. It could be, give me 10 houses in an area or 15 to have a look at that I can go and see this weekend, that I can,
Yeah.
and by the time you start to apply
And you'll still be popping the one that the agent desperately wants to sell, which is high value, to pop up to the top on the search. You know, there'll still be that one there that's there, and it's, you know, it's how it works.
Yeah.
I think it's going to take longer for that model to go away than you think. I think when you get to the world of an interactive video experience, then you're in a different world.
I agree.
However, I do think what we forget is that, let's assume that search is a long process, right? It's a 2-3 month process, and I've got to make sure and organize and so on. At the moment, search is started by us. We physically have to go to an app, we have to go to a website, we have to do something, right? Or it comes via my email as like an alert, right?
Yep.
But imagine that the AI is like 24/7. You had this in a couple of years ago in a presentation. You said, you know, you go in your wall there, and your wall talks to you and says, "Hey, Jonathan, I've just found a house that was listed 2 hours ago, and it meets your criteria." That's where we're getting. That's where we're heading towards. So this is an always-on search.
And I think that's a kind of 5 to 10 year time frame.
I
think it's going to take you longer to get there than many people think, because of all of the problems of practicalities around it.
Yeah.
And, you know, go back to the beginning of Google. I mean, Google can, you know, it can take every ad in real estate, and it has done it in jobs, actually, and it conglomerates it. It could have done that. It doesn't do that because it needs a lot of expertise, actually, to go in and make it really work.
Right, so that brings up another...
Maybe to add to this, it also depends who is searching. Like, I mean, if I think of Dubai.com, we have Chinese buyers in mainland China looking overseas and looking in New York. For them, that would be perfect because they really don't know many of those things. But somebody living in New York in the suburb might not need all the information in the same way, and so on and so forth. So I think it feels, depending on the sophistication about the target market, varying degrees of satisfaction also.
Yeah,
this solution.
exactly. Yeah.
Sorry.
And you know, most people in the UK, I don't know the stat for Asia, I could look for one and couldn't find it. You know, most people in the UK move within 3 miles of where they live. They know the area, they know the schools, they know there's plenty of crime and Streatham, you know, already.
But what they want is they want the process to be simple. I mean,
Yeah.
if anybody here has sold a house recently, it is still extremely painful to deal with all these banks and government agencies, etc., the controls, pest controls, wherever you are, or, you know, all these things. And that is a nightmare to deal with, and that's where I hope an AI agent is far more efficient than the existing agents.
Yeah.
Now let's think about this. Because we're all, none of us here regularly use AI agents. All right? We're not like they're embedded into our lives every day for many tasks. However, if you know, something popped up on LinkedIn for me today, and it was like this list of AI agents, and it was so small, the logos, I couldn't even see them, right? You probably got the same thing, right? And it's like, and when I went, wow, there's like so many out there doing specific tasks. Now, each one of them is optimized for a task. So we've just looked at Manas. That's not optimized for real estate search.
Yeah.
Operator ChatGPT Operator GPT, whatever it's called, is not optimized for real estate search. It just happens to be able to do it.
Yeah.
So imagine you go, well, wait a second, there's a big enough market. I'm just going to focus this on real estate search. Now, instead of thinking about it, and I noticed a question came up here, which can we bring up the questions, thanks? I'm seeing the questions here. If we could bring up the questions, was about why we're talking about search. Because at the end of the day, someone looking to move, we're going to call it search in this process. So if something becomes architectured and thought of from a user experience perspective, but as an AI operator looking for real estate, which is different from using a portal site.
Yep.
Okay, you would architect it differently. So you'd think, well, how do I interface with a person? Well, maybe it's a chat type conversation, as you were talking about with CoStar and this avatar thing. Okay, So maybe it's more of a chat type conversation. Hey, Simon, this has come up. What do you think? What do you like? What don't you like? It's learning a bit. And it doesn't have to be within 2 minutes. Okay, can we put the questions up? Thanks. Right, it can be ongoing. Okay, so it's this ongoing learning about what's important. Because by the way, the more...
Yeah, that's what you want.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what you do with an agent. I mean,
Yeah.
you want an agent, actually,
Yes.
in a conversation you have with an
but
agent.
I don't want to buy... I've used a buyer's agent in the US to buy a property, and they are fundamentally useless, right? I said... I literally had to say, can you take me to see these properties?
Yeah.
Right, because they kept bringing me things that I didn't want to look at, but they wanted me to look at because they were hoping I was going to buy it so they could get their 3% commission. And what I love about an AI agent is I'm not paying them a 3% commission, right?
Yep.
They might get $20,
Yep.
but they're not going to get 3% commission in that process.
So
But
you're talking buyer's agent, which is really,
yes,
really important.
which is where I think it all starts. It's a buyer's agent replacement tool.
Well, we don't have buyer's agents in the UK, but it's an agent replacement.
You have the function.
Because I think it's both sides of the agent that it replaces, actually.
So I think that they're optimizing. The question is who does it, right? Is it an incumbent with the brand and the resources to do it? But then they're basically the innovator's dilemma. They're screwing their own business because it's going to really fundamentally play with the economics. Or are they going to allow someone else to come along and do it?
So I mean, aren't you going to get tech-enabled brokers finally becoming what they should be? Which is, a tech environment that actually, and I was struck, Paul talking about FASWAS and wanting his salespeople only to focus on two things, the listing and the sales. Actually, in a long-term future, what does the agent do? The agent goes out and shows the property. They're a key holder at the end of you need a key holder to go in, and they negotiate. And I think it's going to be a long time before people get comfortable with AI negotiating for them, on the price. It feels like a human thing. So actually, you're working towards a world where you have a platform, and we see this much more in Asia, obviously, than we do in Europe, where you have a platform that does most of the admin stuff, the difficult stuff, and all the personal interaction lives with the agent. And that feels to me like a very powerful thing. But that then begins to destroy, surely, the agency structures we have, and you end up much more with an Asian style, and actually the style you're seeing of businesses like FASWAS develop, where you have brokers on a platform, and the platform is doing the marketing of the properties as well as facilitating the transaction. And I think Georg, that's where your vision is, and where it ultimately ends up in all markets would be my instinct.
Yeah.
Guys, it's an interesting question. Do you think portals will end up having relationships with agentic search companies?
Absolutely. I think they have to. So I think if you go back to the early days of the internet, you had CompuServe and AOL and so on, and the internet businesses were distributed through them, and then those middlemen got cut out of the process, and we went directly there. But as an AI, where as an AI do I learn to trust in this world? The people who create the trust around the listings, who get rid of the duplicates, the fraud, etc., know what's really alive are the portals. So surely the quickest way for the AI to figure out what's good is have a relationship with a portal. And also have links, in some form of AI equivalent of APIs that allows them to get stuff like the location data that's hidden from the public more broadly.
So I guess, and I think, Georg, given you're sitting on 1 million warriors right out there, it feels like it. Okay, how do you think about this from a risk to the business perspective, or is it an opportunity for the business?
Absolute opportunity for the business, because I look at it as a productivity tool, because as we know, if you take a large agent base, there's always the 10% super performers that for them, they will shoot the lights out. With the platform, they will do more and more and more. And then you have the 30%, the next level, they get a bit better. And you have at the tail end, maybe the 20% who don't perform. And that probably will then be clear for them what that all means. By the way, in the whole discussion, we had a conversation outside, where there's also a big need is sometimes there are not enough listings. Maybe there are ways on using AI to make people consider the sale of their property much better. much easier.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
that's a big thing in many countries where there's simply not enough listings.
Yep.
How would that work?
It's almost like understanding in which life cycle people are in. It's kind of a very invasive thing, and kind of at the right time making the right suggestions to people.
So it's
I
like
know
you-
this sounds a bit creepy. It is creepy.
It is, yeah. But,
It is.
But at the end of the day, we're being...
But it's what a real estate agent does too, and nobody thinks it's as creepy. When they
Yeah.
say, "Oh, I saw you guys got divorced, so maybe it's time to sell," or something like that.
Yeah, but it's true.
Yeah.
You know, I had a real estate agent when I had a house in Melbourne who said, "Oh, you're not spending much time here," and he went, "No," and this guy Paul knows me. He said, "Well, have you thought about selling?"
Indeed.
Right? And it's about knowing what's happening, but it becomes your own AI agent who's your own psychotherapist. by the
Correct.
sounds of it.
Because in psychology or in psychotherapy, people rather talk to a chatbot than to a person. I mean, per the research. I know this from a friend of a friend.
So Simon, can I flip a question to you? Because, you know, I know, you know,
I
your
prefer
view...
asking.
Your view is
Somebody's
this
taking
is
over.
that it's going to be much more destructive than my view has been.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
you know, and you're both founding fathers of well, at least midwives of REA. I mean, do you
I've never been called a midwife.
Midwife?
do you see
It was a
REA?
difficult birth. by the way.
Do you see REA being destroyed by agentic search in the next 5 to 10 years?
The question I would have asked is, the way I think about this is if it's, let's pretend it's 1990. 1990, the internet was sort of emerging, you could play with the World Wide Web, they had Gopher, they had a bunch of other stuff, right? And if I'd walked into the offices of any major newspaper around the world and said, you know, your job section, within 15 years gone, right? You know, your short-term accommodation section, gone. You know, all those pages and pages of listings, you know, the little lineage ads, gone. You know, the magazines you distribute, gone, you know, gone or greatly diminished. They would look at me like I came from another planet,
Yep.
right? So the answer is, I can see it happening because I lived through the other one. And I was thinking myself just in this conversation, and we were talking about the speed of change and adoption. You had your pictures of the horses and the carts and so on, right? That most people don't live through multi-change
Correct.
Yep.
in something,
Correct.
right? They live
Yep.
through one change. They went,
Yep.
wow, why didn't I see that coming?
Yep.
And they come out the other side, and it's sort of a new era, you know, whether it's the Industrial Revolution or electricity or whatever it is has come along. But we're in this, we may be, and I don't know, I'm using the word maybe, in this moment where we're going to see in our lifetime 2 seismic changes. One being the movement to digital, and the second is then, you know, this layer that's put on top of it that actually makes it totally different, which is an AI-driven layer.
Yeah.
We may be in that moment. And so instead of erring on the side of caution, I'm choosing to be on the side of what could be.
But what do you actually believe yourself? I mean, do you think,
I believe that. I actually fundamentally believe that we will be using these AI agents far more than we expect.
Yeah.
And the question will be, how does it get integrated into my everyday life? And when we just before we were mentioning, I said, when that's integrated into WhatsApp, because one of the things I think about what I touch all the time, right? That's
Yeah.
WhatsApp. I don't use Telegram, but I was chatting with Stephen Insco out here before, and he was saying, guys, can we fix this up? Before, and he was saying, yeah, did you know on Telegram we're selling mattresses, I think you were talking about, and what we do is we've got these people, 15,000 people who are just in a group about mattresses, and he puts up a mattress, 60% discount, sold.
It's how cars are being sold in a big way in Brazil now, used cars.
And so going, well, who would have thought of that, right? And if I'm a portal, if I'm a car site, I'm going, well, I didn't see that coming,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
Correct.
So the thing is, I've been around too long to know that I've got blind spots, right? And I'm not going to assume that I don't have them. I know I've got them. And so if I'm sitting there out the front, then I was thinking, I had this conversation the other day with, I don't remember who it was now, and we were talking about, you know, the right moves, the REAs, the large, you know, the Scout 24s, the large incumbents who have got lots of daylight seconds.
Yep.
And we were talking about the generational change that's happened in those businesses. So the people who are in these businesses now, running these businesses, tend to be managers who are very good at putting prices up.
Yep.
Right? Innovation, you don't need
More
to be
tricky.
massively,
Yep.
you're innovating around the edges, right? But you're not, fundamentally disrupting another industry.
Yep.
So if someone comes along and is trying to disrupt you, what do? You don't actually have the DNA or the tools or what to fall back on, right? Because you don't have the
I
experience.
think they've got more of that than the newspapers had. I mean, the newspapers, and I went through that experience and had that conversation with newspapers and just put my head in my hands, and we were right and they were wrong. It's kind of.
But remember, they've got to protect market price. They've got to protect all this sort of stuff. So you're in this dilemma now, right? You've got too much at risk.
But they've seen enough happen. Also, they're in a much closer industry. They are tech businesses. They do develop. They have put together AI teams pretty quickly. They're learning about it. They're piloting, experimenting. That's not what the newspapers were like. The newspapers weren't kind of defending their.
No, actually, no, I disagree. Because I sat in what was called News Interactive.
Yeah.
Right, in 2000.
Yeah.
Right, which was, the internet's here, let's set up a News Interactive, which was to do the future. And they literally, even with people who were detached from the past, couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Right? They had Homes Online was before News bought REA. There's a bit of history for anyone. Anyone? Remember Homes Online? No? Okay, there was Homes Online. That's how good it was. News Corp in Australia. So
I think you're saying, on balance, you think REA is going to be destroyed by this.
No, I don't. Destroyed is not the word I would use. I would say
disrupted in a way that greatly reduces it.
Potentially challenged in a way it's not been challenged for 15 years.
Okay, but that's still saying challenge. You can deal with challenge, not deal with challenge. I mean, is this a disruptive wave that is going to destroy the dApps, as Malcolm calls them? That's kind of the question in people's minds.
I don't think it will destroy, but it will force them to rapidly innovate in a way that they may not actually have the skills to innovate at the moment.
Okay, so they may end up much diminished businesses.
They may.
Okay.
Or their role may be diminished, or their position in the market may be diminished in this whole process. But I don't. The question is there? Let's take Rightmove or what? It doesn't matter. They're all the same conversation, right? Are they at a peak in their evolution, or can they go even further?
Yeah.
And I've got a feeling that it may be more the first than the second. Would be my thought around that. Yeah. And therefore, you've got to innovate. You've got to think about how you approach this differently. And you can't go, no, don't worry.
I mean, from my perspective, going to your newspaper times back, at that time with technology, you could think of all sorts of disruptions. You could think of agents being disrupted and so on, and they were not. Nobody probably at that time thought that the big money is in simply moving a newspaper into a digital way, because that's what it is, nothing else. But it's a powerful disruption. It's a really, really powerful disruption because it's not just efficiency, it's really doing something which wasn't possible before for the consumer. I don't know, looking forward, as you say, where the big change will come from. The fact that we talk about the search is exactly the example of the horses. It's kind of saying, we keep the carriage and we're building around it. The search is the essence of effectively the portal, but in the future, whatever the future holds is not centered around the search. It's around the key problem. Because the key problem is show me all the listings. That's not the problem anybody cares about. It's I want a house, and the other one wants, I want to sell a house. That's the only thing people care about. And yes, we say, we give you so many leads and so on. That is all nice. That's kind of, the old school technologies, solution selling. We can do this and our solution can do that. Nobody cares about it. We want a house. We want it sold. That's it.
Yeah. I want to wrap up, but I've got a final thought around this. If you go back to the times in the 90s with newspapers and real estate agents and how they exist, it was a mega inefficient market, super inefficient. Because I could look at the newspaper, I'm not going to see everything for sale, but there's some agents, I talk to them, and you go through this big, long process. And that's from the search side. And from a sales side, there was a whole bunch of contracts, and I had to talk to a notary or in Europe, or I have to talk to a conveyancer or whatever it is, right? And so on. It was inefficient. Then the internet's made it more efficient on the search side, but it's not truly efficient, right?
No.
Right? Because I go to a Rightmove or an REA or a domain, doesn't matter, right? And I'm seeing paid ads at the top rather than the ads that necessarily 100% meet what I'm asking for. And I still have to do work, right? So we're on this efficiency and transparency curve that's going in a direction. AI is adding another layer on top that allows for more efficiency, more transparency. So here's the example we saw with Manus. I could do that myself. I can do the search to see the properties, I can do some calculations of what I can afford, and I'm doing all the stuff separately, less efficient. It's just taking all that work, making it efficient and doing it in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, but remember, most consumers don't change the search order even when they look at listings on a property portal.
Yeah.
The stats are there. The consumer's happy with this product. The
Right.
consumer is. I'm more in the stage of, we've got this world of transaction. How do you bring the marketing, the transaction, everything together onto one platform? That's the kind of future from my perspective. And
Yeah.
Sorry.
and I think it's how you evolve in that way.
I think we're going to wrap up, but my one last comment was, in 1990, the consumer was happy with the newspaper.
Yeah, and I think AI is going to accelerate that move to a single platform that does the transaction.
But so the parting thought out of all of this is, something's happening. We don't exactly know what's going to happen, but we do know that there will be change.
Absolutely.
And this is not iBuyer. This is not any of the other fads that have come and gone. This is far more seismic because it's not just in the real estate industry. It's going to happen in travel. It's going to happen in all these things. I am starting to experiment using these AI agents to do my travel, right? Which is saving me hours of stuffing around, right? Now, if it's going to work for that, I'm now going to be so much more comfortable using an AI agent. If I become more and more comfortable using an AI agent for the common tasks, they'll be far more comfortable using it for the less common tasks.
You will.
And it'll eventually become my first point of call.
Perfect.
And then you're going to have the AI agent sitting over the AI agents,
Correct.
where I just talk to it, and then it then works out which bloody agent is the best one to use for me. And then it'll have sub-agents. It'll be this pyramid structure.
Yeah.
But I'll be talking to whatever I call it, Fred. I might call it Georg, actually. Hey, Georg. Right? And it will then come back to me, and I'll have this voice interaction, and it'll be handling everything from my travel to booking this to whatever.
Yeah.
But there's still a good chance that expertise will be sat within a Rightmove agent, at that point in time.
But I'm willing to place a bit of a bet today that I think when I wake up in 10 years' time, the market structure looks pretty different. But there will be real estate agents. There will be.
There will be, yes, in some form. And there will be also a number of unemployed people, but that is a thing for the future, like not just in real estate, but in general, as a result of the AI agentic thing.
I don't think you should start that conversation.
But
we could have that one for a long
starting that
time.
conversation, but I just thought at least we covered that off too.
Okay, hopefully that woke everyone up this morning. It woke me up. Anyway.
So can I just say, if you rate me, I'm Ricardo, so give me bad grade.
Thank you very much, Jonathan and Ricardo.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
That was a bit of fun.